Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching Today I Found Out, and in the video today we're answering a viewer question. Carol R asks, how much money does Bill Gates carry around with him on a daily basis? Just before we get started, I do want to say that this video is brought to you by Hims. If you're a man who wants to keep his hair, and I'm not missing the irony here, go to forhims.com/brainfood and try Hims for just $5 while supplies last. We bet that the vast majority of people watching this, regardless of gender, race, or socioeconomic background, carry the same few basic items with them at all times. A phone, some keys, a few bills in the local currency, a debit card, and maybe some ID. These are all items you'd reliably expect to find on someone if you just stopped them on the street and asked them what they had on them. But what would you find if you asked a millionaire or even a billionaire to do the same thing? As it turns out, it would appear you'd find they'd produce more or less the same or less from their pockets as the average Joe. For example, Bill Gates rarely seems to carry cash at all, or at least rarely admits to doing so. Gates is frequently asked by both journalists and the people he meets how much money he carries around with him on a daily basis, and in almost every interview we found, Gates's stock response is that he seldom carries either cash or a wallet with him. An exception to this was a preamble Gates did to an AMA on Reddit, where he preemptively answered some of the more popular questions he's found himself being asked in the past, including how much money do you have in your wallet? The answer to which, at least at that moment in time, was a single crisp $100 bill. It should be noted that the next question Gates answered was, can I have $1 million? Which he tactfully answered by explaining that he donates the bulk of his money to needy causes. This question, and Bill's desire to answer it ahead of time, likely explains why he rarely carries cash, or at least doesn't admit to doing so. After all, nobody can ask you for money if you're known not to carry any around. Gates here is by no means an outlier, and it's an observable phenomenon that the ultra-wealthy rarely seem to feel the need to carry around all that much cash, or even a wallet at all. Reasons vary from billionaire to billionaire, but the most common answer seems to be that they simply don't need to carry a wallet. Billionaires are inevitably flanked at all times by an army of assistants and aides who can take care of things like restaurant bills and tips on their behalf, so the need to carry physical currency, credit cards, or even ID is diminished somewhat. On the credit card front, it's also worth noting that in more recent years, credit and debit cards have become more of a status symbol than physical currency in some circles. To quote Vanity Fair on the matter, possessing 2 or 3 of the right cards bound together by an ordinary rubber band now conveys a level of distinction greater than that of any cash-filled Louis Vuitton wallet or purse. The fact of the matter is that cards like the hyper-exclusive American Express Centurion card, which as we've mentioned in another video can literally be used to buy anything that's for sale, even if it costs hundreds of millions of dollars, convey more about a person's wealth than even the crispest stack of $100 bills. Another reason the super rich don't need to carry much cash around with them is that their fame largely makes it unnecessary, whether they have any aides with them or not. For example, prior to becoming president, Donald Trump admitted that he didn't carry a wallet because people usually gave him stuff for free. In his own words from a 2013 interview, he said, "You know, it's very sad. I go to a restaurant and almost every time they say, 'Mr. Trump, it's on me. No charge, Mr. Trump.' No, I never need cash." This isn't to say Trump doesn't sometimes carry cash. In keeping with his penchant for showmanship, Trump did formally claim to carry around a few $100s at any given time, or at least he did prior to becoming president. He stated this was mainly just in case he needed to hand out tips rather than the money being used to actually buy something. Beyond money or a wallet, Trump also claimed he usually only carried around 2 cell phones, an iPhone and a Samsung. We presume one was for personal use and the other was a business phone. How much this has changed since becoming president is not yet clear. Continuing this trend, even before ubiquitous credit and debit cards, the like of Howard Hughes, John Lennon, and even Elvis reported seldom feeling the need to carry cash. In Elvis's case, many of his trademark suits were even made without pockets. In regards to each man, while their reason for not carrying money varied, Hughes was supposedly scared of being robbed, for example, and was generally surrounded by an army of assistants anyway, their fame made this decision a relatively easy one to live with. For instance, like Trump after him, John Lennon famously expressed puzzlement at the fact that the wealthier and more famous he became, the less he was expected to pay for anything. To wit, biographer Philip Norman stated, "He discovered the strange truth that the richer one becomes, the less obligation there is to pay for anything. Clubs he visited pressed free drinks on him, restaurants automatically waived bills, guitar makers sent him their choicest new models simply for the glory of his patronage." This segues into another thing previously alluded to, that the obscenely rich seldom carry ID. Although they do own passports and driving licenses, in interviews we trawled through in which the rich and famous were asked to turn out their pockets, few of them seem to bother carrying around any form of identification. The most likely reason being, of course, that they are quite recognizable anyway. A notable outlier to this is the Queen, who goes so far as not even having a passport or a driver's license. But as we've mentioned in a previous video, while her face may be one of the most recognizable in the world, the reason she doesn't have them is not because she's famous, but because she simply doesn't legally need them to travel or drive, regardless of where she is in the world. For the reasons why here, do see our video, Why Doesn't the Queen Need a Passport? Description below. Speaking of the Queen, although nobody but herself knows exactly what she carries around with her in her purse, we do know that she similarly never bothers to carry cash, except on Sundays, when she traditionally carries a crisp £5 note to place in her church's collection plate. Other items the Queen has been observed putting into or pulling out of her purse, handbag and pockets include lipstick, pens, napkins, and on one occasion, a suction cup that she attached to the underside of her table that she then hung her handbag on, which is actually kind of brilliant actually. The more unusual items the Queen is said to carry with her include personal knickknacks, dog biscuits, and random mints that she hands out to strangers. Going along with the theme that the richer you are, the less likely you are to have to pay for something, one of the more curious items carried by a billionaire we stumbled across was a special card carried by Warren Buffett that lets him have unlimited McDonald's forever at certain McDonald's. More specifically, as we've actually talked about before, this card is good for free food for life throughout Omaha McDonald's and is one of the few items that Buffett claims to carry on his person. Other items the famously spendthrift billionaire likes to carry include an original green American Express card from 1964, pictures of his family, and a lucky signed $50 bill from a bank his investment firm, Berkshire Hathaway, used to own. Curiously, Buffett is unique among the billionaires we researched in that he's the only one we found that admits to regularly carrying change. You see, Buffett nearly always eats breakfast at the McDonald's near his house in Omaha on his way to work, and curiously, despite having a card that grants him unlimited McDonald's for life and billions in the bank, he says that he pays for breakfast with exact change. We assume he perhaps does this to avoid calling attention to himself or otherwise being delayed on his way to work by producing his special McDonald's card. But unfortunately for us, in the interview where he mentions carrying exact change for this purpose, the interviewer didn't ask why he doesn't just use his free McDonald's card. Whatever the case, Buffett also carries a few dollars with him to pay for the cans of Coca-Cola that he drinks at the office, something he does despite owning about 10% of Coca-Cola. Bill Gates also once noted in a letter concerning his charitable foundation that Buffett and he were once visiting China together and decided to grab a bite to eat. Naturally, the pair of billionaires decided to dine at McDonald's. It was at this point that Buffett produced coupons in order to help reduce their bill. Another billionaire who kindly admitted to the monetary contents of his wallet in an interview is Elon Musk, who stated that he only had about $40 in his wallet at that time. In conclusion, thanks to their fantastic wealth, the uber-rich paradoxically seem to have less need for carrying cash, credit cards, or even ID than us lowly mortals. This is because their army of assistants will take care of things like that, or simply because they are less likely to be expected to pay for things. Alright, so I really hope you did enjoy that video, and now I'd like to tell you for just a minute about Hims. So Hims is a company that provides guys with real solutions to problems related to hair or a lack of it, skin, and other parts of the male body that don't work so great as we get older. So sometimes things are not easy to talk about, and that can even be the case when you're talking to your doctor, which is probably why our spam messages, or at least mine, are totally filled with things like hair loss magic formula. I don't know if they know I'm bald, but they do seem pretty spot on, along with other things like the ever-present adverts for penis pills. But scammy emails for online Mexican pharmacies, be gone, because there's this thing called science that you might have heard of, and if you're watching this channel, you probably actually like science. Science, it's all about things that actually work, because no matter what, the special supplement super herb from that sketchy email, well, my hair is not coming back. As awesome as that might be. Now, Hims is not some sketchy online pharmacy where a doctor signs off on something. It's a legitimate medical company with proper doctors giving proper consultations for scientifically proven things that will actually make a real difference in your life. Medications that can actually prevent hair loss, and believe me, as I said at the beginning of the video, I'm not missing the irony here, it's just too late for me. And also medications that can improve your skin as well as your sex life. So cut out the middleman, expensive drugs, insurance companies, or not if you don't have them, and get fully FDA approved medications at a fraction of the cost by going to Hims. It's private, it's cheaper, it's convenient. Really, there is no reason not to. Basically, how Hims works is you go to the website, you have a private consultation with a doctor who will recommend both prescription and non-prescription products that are specially tailored to your needs. You then pay a super reasonable price. There are no expensive brand medications. All of the medications that Hims use are off patent, so there's no need to pay through the nose. And then it's all delivered to your door. They actually sent me a sample box. It contains things like this. They are great looking little boxes and shampoos and all of the stuff you need. More details on the website about all of this stuff. Now, currently, hair and sexual products are available and skin is being launched in early 2017. So hair, skin, and sex life, they're all issues that guys can have, and they're all issues that we're not really so big on talking about. So do not have an awkward conversation at the doctor's office, but do solve the problem. You can support this show by going to forhims.com/brainfood and try Hims for just $5 today plus tax. See the website for full details, link in the description below. Thanks to Hims for sponsoring, and thanks to you for watching.